Hello everyone. Today I'll be talking about the evolution of a cuff cloud, focusing primarily on the droplet microphysics that is associated with different expiratory events. As you have seen in the previous talk, that expiratory events typically are turbulent multiphase gas clouds, and there are some similarities with that of their atmospheric counterpart. So in terms of the number of droplets that are released during a process when we cough or sneeze can be very high. It can be around 10,000 for sneezing. It could be around a few hundred for coughing. For breathing, it can be around 50 to 60 droplets per second, but if done over several breathing cycles, it can be fairly large. The ejection velocities can also be quite large. You can have around droplets ejected at 20 meter per second when we sneeze to a few meter per second for a rigorous breathing process. The droplet size also spans a wide range. It can be submicron to a millimeter, and this makes the settling Reynolds number and the Stokes number quite varied. This is a reason why the problem is even harder, because you can't immediately box the problem as something that is dissipation dominated with negligible particle and fluid inertia. The injection Reynolds number is large enough that the ambient flow is inherently turbulent, and this makes an analysis of this problem have some similarities with the atmospheric clouds, but in some aspects you will see that they're dissimilar. There's one aspect in which it's probably more similar to of another geophysical multiphase flow, which is that of sea space. The cloud droplets are usually present in a supersaturated environment where they grow due to condensation, and then turbulence and sedimentation picks up and makes them large enough to form raindrops that then fall to the ground. Condensation is probably not that important a phenomena for the expiratory event. What is more important is the evaporation process. Just like what happens for sea space, the atmospheric marine boundary layer is laden with droplets, which are formed due to wave breaking, bubble bursting, and jets breaking up at the surface. And this droplet-rich boundary layer leads to an interaction via the momentum, mass, and heat transport with the ambient carrier phase. Something similar to what possibly would be happening for different kinds of respiratory events. Another hard thing to actually measure in each of these problems is the droplet size distribution. What you see in the top left panel is the droplet size distribution it's made in situ measurements made during the CAPIS project of IITM Pune, just pre-monsoon at different altitudes. The bottom panel is that known as the sea spray generating function, which is the number of droplets ejected per square meter of the ocean surface per droplet radius per unit time, and something that's has led to different various kinds of modeling effort, because this is again a hard thing to measure. The top right is a classical picture of droplet size distribution during coughing. There have been several modifications and alterations to these pictures, with now more contemporary pictures actually commenting that the distribution could be probably bimodal or trimodal, depending on different kinds of expiratory events. Now, why is droplet microphysics so important? And why does it matter in the context of pathogenesis? Because these droplets, unlike their atmospheric and the oceanic counterparts, will invariably be pathogen laden. So since they're carrying pathogens, if we are able to understand the droplet microphysics better, we will have some better understanding of aerosolization of viruses, the airborne transmission of viruses. The contemporary effort of explaining whether a disease is airborne or not is primarily related to the size of the droplet. That if droplets are less than 5 micron, they form droplet nuclei and you have airborne transmission. And if droplets are larger than 5 micron, then you would have droplet-based transmission, which would essentially be mostly to do with surface contact and contamination. Now, this is not entirely a picture coming out of a mechanistic understanding of the problem. So when the early stages of COVID-19, you had measurements of the survival of the virus on different surfaces as well as in aerosolized form. So as an aerosol, it was lasting close to an hour, and on surfaces, it had a far longer time scale, which probably led to the idea that If it forms drops, it would be on surfaces for longer, and then the transmission mechanism would rather be droplet rather than airborne transmission. But this has been undergoing revision significantly, and as recent as a week back, you have articles on the fact that this is predominantly an airborne transmission mechanism. Now I'll be focusing on the fluid mechanics of this, where what drives the droplet microphysics for a cuffing process, and borrowing ideas from some other droplet particle interaction dynamics that we have been doing. So as Rama has already outlined, that some of the key features of this problem is that there is an inherent large scale turbulence. The dynamics is transient. There is importance of polydispersity, importance of thermodynamics. Particle and fluid inertia is non-negligible. Hydrodynamic interactions could be important if we have very large number of droplets being released. If the mass loading is significant, we're talking about water droplets in air, then there can be importance of momentum and energy coupling. And these aren't really just plain aqueous drops. There are pathogens inside this. These are virus laden drops that we're talking about in the current context. So the dynamics inside the drop is also quite important. And finally, obviously, what makes them very different from cloud droplets or sea spray, the rheology. They are formed due to the detachment of the mucus lining that is there in a respiratory tract due to an imposed shear stress. And they are inherently non-Newtonian. So for the present purpose, I'm just going to focus on 3 of these points, which is the evaporation, the hydrodynamic interaction, and the dynamics that is there inside a single drop. So to model the droplet microphysics, the momentum balance is what you have already seen in the previous talk, which is by using the Maxey-Riley equation that says that the droplet acceleration is due to the balance of the different fluid forces that acts on the particle. For mass and energy balance, we say that the change in the radius is due to the difference in the vapor pressure. And this is something which has been classically developed for cloud droplets. But then what we are using is more tuned for sea spray, because cloud droplet models did not account for salinity, and the sea spray droplet evaporation model do account for salinity. So, and which is something that is important for the cuff drops, because cuff drops again are not purely water. And then you need to close this system by including an equation for the energy transport, where you would have the convective heat transport with the ambient and then the latent heat term. So what we are missing here, and something that's again fairly important, is the role of organic matter. So there have been some nice experiments where evaporation studies of droplets in presence of different proteins have been done. And it does matter. The organic matter does play a role in terms of the evaporation dynamics, but that's something which we have not included in the present study. So looking at just saline drops and their sedimentation. So if I ask the question that I have a 40 micron drop, how long would it take for it to settle 1 meter? So it roughly takes around 120 seconds, which is significantly more than what you would get from the non-evaporating case. And it depends crucially on the relative humidity. So if the relative humidity was lower, you would have a faster evaporation process. And as you can see that even the droplet temperature, it does not monotonically relax to the ambient temperature. There is an initial cooling of the drop due to the evaporation process, and then subsequently a convective transport matching to the ambient temperature. Now, what about the role of the flow? So if we have heavy particles in a background flow, then the Maxey-Riley equation can be reduced to a very simple form, where the acceleration of the drop is balanced by the Stokes drag and the weight of the particle. And if you say that the particle inertia is small, then the correction of the particle velocity from the fluid velocity depends on the fluid acceleration. So it can be nicely shown that this leads to heavy particles being preferentially present in regions of large strain and ejected out of regions of vorticity. This is known as preferential concentration. Now, what would happen when you have evaporation? Because when you have evaporation, the particle relaxation time scale, which you're talking about is tau v, that depends on the instantaneous drop size. And this would then alter the concentration process. So initially there would be a preferential concentration just like the non-evaporating system. But as you progress in time, the droplets would move more towards a tracer particle. So this is what you can see here. You have particles here being initially seated inside a lambda dipole. A lambda dipole is a pair of counter-rotating vortices, very commonly used to model different kinds of dipolar flows. And the top panel is for tracers, where they largely remain confined inside the vortices. And the bottom left one is for inertial particle without evaporation, and the red particles are the inertial particles with evaporation. So in the initial stages, the red and the blue particles look almost identical. But as time went by, evaporation started becoming important. The role of inertia starts to diminish for the evaporating particles, and they start to behave more like tracer particle because the inertia is gradually reducing with time. And for a large time, you would see that there is a tendency for these particles to behave more like tracers. So we would expect now that the coupling of the evaporation and the flow is something that would be important to understand the transport of droplets due to different breathing events. So to model a puff, we choose a Hills vortex. And a Hills vortex is a simple model of a translating spherical vortex. And it has been observed that for impulsively started jets, the tip often is a spherical vortex. So we choose this for the simplicity of the flow field and to get an initial understanding of the dynamics. Now we consider both a steady Hills vortex as well as an unsteady Hills vortex. This is an approximation where we say that the Hills vortex is actually expanding in size as t to the power 1/4, and the velocity decays as the t to the power minus 3/4 in a line with what would typically happen for a puff. This kind of an approximation has previously been done for thermals, where a thermal has been modeled as an expanding Hills vortex, which is decelerating. So here you have 100 particles seated inside the vortex. Each particle is a monodispersed cloud. Each particle is 50 micron, and the relative humidity is around 90%. The ambient temperature is 35 degrees Celsius. So we consider three cases. We do a problem where there is only particle inertia and no evaporation. We do a case where there is evaporation, but the particles are isothermal. And then we do a case where there is evaporation, but we do the full heat transport calculation. So as you can see that the inertial particle without any evaporation settles the fastest because the particle size doesn't reduce with time. Where with evaporation, there is a reduction in particle size which slows down the dynamics. And this slowing down of the dynamics is actually important because you would have particles now present at heights close to the ejection point, where a neighboring air current can probably disperse them even more. So this is the mean vertical position and the horizontal spread of the droplet cluster. The blue line is when we do it with evaporation non-isothermal case, and the red, so the blue line is actually it's written incorrectly. The blue line is actually the evaporation isothermal case, and the red line is when evaporation is done with the correct heat transfer, whereas the black line is without evaporation. And this is obviously done at a large relative humidity. So you don't really see a large difference between the evaporation and the no evaporation case, but as you move on to lower relative humidity, the difference starts to bring in. An interesting thing to notice here is also the horizontal spread, that as the particles are spreading in the horizontal direction, they seem to asymptote to a certain horizontal size. And this possibly could be a modified version of a Darwinian drift, where the Lagrangian displacement that occurs for a particle due to a moving object. Now, what about the role of polydispersity, relative humidity, and temperature? So if we start with 200 particles with different relative humidity and different ambient temperature, we choose a polydispersed system that's obeying a log normal distribution. And an interesting thing to actually observe is that all of these distributions are going to migrate towards the left side, go to the smallest residue cluster. And as it evolves, we see that there is definitely a difference that appears due to the difference in relative humidity and the ambient temperature. Further analysis is obviously required in order to actually explore this with an ambient flow. Now, what about the role of hydrodynamic interactions? Now, if you have very dense clusters of droplets, they are known to actually lead to instabilities and patterns which are purely due to hydrodynamic interactions. So what you see here is a sedimenting cluster of particles that forms a torus and then breaks up, modeled as a set of Stokes slit, or if the fluid inertia was important, modeled as a set of Poisson-lets. Now, this is something which would not happen if interaction were not there. There is no background flow in this problem. And for reference, you can see experiments which have been done for these kind of suspension drops. This is something that have been studied exhaustively in literature, both using theory and simulation. What we have been trying to look at is if the particle inertia is also included. So you solve for Maxwell-Lee equation with hydrodynamic interaction, where you either have a Stokes-Slit based interaction or Poisson-Let based interaction. That can play a prominent role in terms of this breakup of the formation of the torus as well as the breakup of the torus. So this is something which would be going towards the goal of coupling the background flow, evaporation, and if you have a dense droplet cluster, especially something for like a sneezing exercise, where interaction probably also would become important. Finally, we have been talking about droplet clusters. We have been focusing on what happens to a large number of droplets, but each of these droplets are also filled with pathogens. They have, in this current context, we're talking about drops which have viruses in them. So a question to also ask is, how long does it take for a colloidal particle? So if we're talking about the coronavirus, it's 100 nanometers in size. So how long would it take for a 100 nanometer particle to actually reach the droplet surface? Now you can do this exercise for a stationary drop by saying it's just a diffusive transport, and you can immediately work out how long would it take for a 100 nanometer particle to swim through and reach the droplet surface. Now, if there is translation, so these are droplets which are falling, then there is a background convection that is also there. So how would the convection actually speed up the transport of these colloidal particles or these viruses to the droplet surface? And what we observe here is that due to the background convection, the transport to the droplet surfaces gets speeded up. And this is primarily happening because the translating drop has a flow field, which is exactly like the Hill's vortex, a pair of convection cells, a pair of circulation zones. And the droplets initially in the strong convection limit, the droplets initially get swirled around in these convection cells, and as it approaches the separatress, due to Brownian motion, it can basically jump from one of the cells to the other cells, which can lead to large scale transport actually happening. So if we calculate what would be the exit time for weak convection, there would be a diffusive transport, and for strong convection, we are finding that the transport is even further enhanced than the anomalous diffusion scaling. So the anomalous diffusion scaling is what you get when you have an array of spatially periodic convection cells, and you ask the question that how much enhanced diffusion do you get, because of the fact that it jumps from one convection cell to the other due to the small amount of Brownian motion is there as it skims through the separatrices. A fluid particle cannot cross those separatrices, but a Brownian particle can. So here we have considered a very special kind of initial condition. So we get an exit time which scales even, the exit time is even faster than the Root-Peclet scaling that you get. So with this, I would like to end, and thank my students, Anu, Nishant, and Pijush, who were responsible for doing many of these calculations. And thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk about our work. And I'd be happy to take further questions.